All right. So, if you have your Bibles, we're going to be all over the place. But we're going to start in, well, we're not going to start there, but we'll be in John 8, like I said we would be last week, all right? So, we're in a series right now called Journey to the Cross. And so the goal is to walk through most of the entire book of John, all right? So, we're going to start in chapter 8, and then we're going to go down, we're going to skip some, but it's all going to be good. I think you know how it ends, all right? So, to begin, before you get into John 8, it begins at a, let's go to Deuteronomy 16. We'll pick up there, all right? That's where we'll start. It says this, and you got to know about this because this is actually, in John 8, this is the setting for John 8, and actually John 7 also. So if you're looking at John 7 and 8, they're the same day, all right? But this is the backdrop in Deuteronomy of what's happening in the world at that time, all right? So Deuteronomy 16:13, it says, "Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you've gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. And be joyful at your festival. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who have in your towns. For 7 days celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. And for the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all your work of your hands, and your joy will be complete." And so there's like 3 major festivals in the Jewish tradition that they would all, at those times, they would gather their stuff and they would head towards the temple, and they would make their offerings and do all these things. And so this is kind of the backdrop of what's going on, but it's actually kind of it's a really big party. It's a huge party. So I looked in the Mishnah. All right, this is kind of a Jewish text, and that I found, and this describes this event, this festival of tabernacles. All right, so it says this. This is from the Mishnah. It says, "They said, anyone who has not seen the rejoicing of Bet Hashubah," all right, I did that okay. That means Festival of Tabernacles. That's the same thing, all right? So that's the Festival of Tabernacles. "His life has never seen rejoicing." At the end of the first festival, the Levites went down to the women's courtyard, and they made a major enactment by putting men, so they would do kind of an enactment, and there were golden candle holders. So this is the important part. There were golden candle holders there with 4 gold bowls at their tops and 4 ladders for each candlestick, and 4 young priests with jars of oil containing 120 logs. They would climb up the ladders, and they would pour the oil into each bowl. And then it says, "Out of the worn-out undergarments and girdles of the priests, they made wicks, and with them they lit the candlesticks. And there was not a courtyard in Jerusalem which was not lit up by the light of Bet Hashubah." Hashubah? Right, so these festivals, like, this is a massive, massive party, and I had never kind of, I never knew exactly what that was. You kind of read some things, you just kind of move past them because there's so much to read, but I was really kind of looking at this, and this idea of the fire, of these candles, these wicks that would be lit up, what they represented was they represented the pillar of fire in Exodus. If you go back to Exodus, there's a pillar of fire that is kind of guiding the Israelites at night to where they need to go, and it's a pillar of smoke during the day, and that was kind of how the Israelites could look, because there's millions of them. Like, there's over a million of them in Exodus, making that trek to the promised land, and so they need something to orient themselves around, right? When there's that many people moving, you need something to orient yourself, and so there was a pillar of fire at night, and so these candles, they represent God, because that was God leading the Israelites through the wilderness we talked about last week. So this is the backdrop then, and Jesus says this with all this going on in John 8 verse 12, and you know this passage, but it means so much more now. It says, "Again, Jesus spoke." Are you able to pull up the whole image? Maybe not. There it is. "Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk, have the light of life." I've read that statement so many times, and you just kind of read it. He's the light of the world, and you're like, yeah, maybe it's just rainbows and sunshine everywhere Jesus goes, and that's, you kind of have this kind of light view of it. But when you look at it in where he's at and what the backdrop is behind him, and he goes, when he says, I am the light of the world, he's saying, no, I am the pillar that was guiding the Israelites through the wilderness. I am that light. And so while the pillar was guiding the Israelites through the wilderness, Jesus says, I'm actually the light of the world. Right? And so what does that mean? It means we orient ourselves around Jesus, right? That he is the one that we follow, and we'll get to what follow means a little bit later. But there's this idea, and then I was thinking about Jesus and John, and because remember in John 1 he says, the Word was God, the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and made its dwelling among us. Right? That's John 1. And I was thinking about the light, and John, and Jesus is the Word, and then remember that psalm, Psalm 119. It's like a famous psalm, but it says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." And so David has no idea. He's just talking about the law. He's talking about the Torah. But Jesus, John tells us, Jesus is the law. Jesus is the Word, and so Jesus is the light unto my feet, and a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And so my struggle with that was, I always thought he's the lamp that I carry around and lights up my path. That's kind of how I always envisioned it. It was like, he's going to light up where I go. I got to keep him in front of me and light. It's like, no. He's just the light, and you just go where the light is. Like, he's lighting the path. So it's like, you want to know where to go. It's like, well, look to Jesus. Look, what does that mean? What does that mean, right? Because I would get, I don't know if you ever, when I do youth ministry, I would get these questions a lot, like, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go to school? All these kind of questions that we never really get an answer to. And it's like they want God to kind of answer those questions or something. And it's like, I don't know that I think God's more interested in what we do along the journey, in who we are at the end of the journey, than it is where we're actually going or what we're actually doing, right? The important part is the way that we live, right? We live that way. And so that's what it's like to follow Jesus. I mean, even in the Great Commission, right? It says, go into the world and make disciples. Like, that actually translates as you go into the world. Like, so it's this whole idea of living life like Jesus, moving through your life, not stressing about what I got to do, where I got to go. It's like, just live that life, live your life, and be Jesus in the midst of it. I'm all over my notes right now, so bear with me. So if you looked at John chapter 8, anyone look at it ahead of time coming in? We got a couple. Okay, so it's a long chapter. It's like 50 verses, so I'm not going to read all of them, all right? But what it is there's kind of a dialogue that ensues, a back and forth between Jesus and the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, they're trying to kill Jesus, all right? And they want to, or at least they want to trap him, because as he preaches and as he loves everyone in his area and he's gaining followers, and people are, it's getting incredible, the amount of people that begin to follow him. And what that means is they used to follow the Pharisees, right? They used to be all about them. And so the Pharisees see this, they go, there's no one kind of at our teachings. Everyone's at Jesus' teachings, right? And it's like, so we don't like that. No one likes to lose power. And that's what you're going to see through this entire series, is the Pharisees, as they lose power, the Pharisees are the religious elites of the day, right? The ones kind of given to guide the Jews to know God. They're not happy with Jesus. You go back to John chapter 7. You can go backwards a little bit, and he kind of makes this clear. In verse 25, it says, at that point, some of the people of Jerusalem began to ask, isn't this the man they're trying to kill? Right? So Jesus had been teaching all day. And they're like, isn't this the guy he's trying to kill? Here he is, speaking publicly, and they are not saying a word to him. Have the authorities really concluded that he is the Messiah? And so that's really the dialogue. Like, is he the Savior? Is he the one that we've been waiting for? And so really what it comes down to is the Pharisees would love it if he would say that he isn't the Messiah. That way people would leave. Like, just be clear. They were like, just be clear. Tell us who you are, right? Or that he would say something blasphemous or wrong, or blasphemous, kind of lying about God intentionally, right? That he would say something like that they could stone him. Like, all they want to do is discredit him. They just want him gone. They're tired of him. He is a thorn in their side. And so in John chapter 8, we'll pick up at verse 25. It's the same question, right? It's, who are you? Who are you, they asked. Just I've been telling you from the beginning, Jesus replied. I have much to say in judgment of you, but he who sent me is trustworthy, and what I have heard from him I tell the world. And so the kind of the crux of the situation is Jesus has a judgment to bring on the Pharisees. Because the Pharisees were, again, they were given the job to take care of the people. Like, you're supposed to teach the people, guide the people, lead the people. They're supposed to know me. And it's like, nah, I got a judgment against you because you're not doing it. You're not doing a good job. And so in Matthew chapter 23, we get a really clear idea of how Jesus feels about the Pharisees. All right, he says this in Matthew 23, verse 1. It says, then Jesus said to the crowd and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, they sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and be called rabbi by others. Like, Jesus isn't making friends here, right? Yeah, like he is pronouncing judgment on the people that were positioned to lead them, right? And actually teach them about Jesus, right? I mean, they missed Jesus. They're supposed to know everything about the law. They're supposed to be waiting for this Messiah, and he's standing in front of them, and they go, we got to kill him, right? So it's like, this is the judgment. But here's the thing. It's the church tends to look a lot more like Pharisees at times than it does Jesus, right? They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. And the church has been doing that as far back as you can go. Religious leaders have been burdening people with rules and regulations under the punishment of an eternal hell, and all I can do is wonder if Jesus looks at us and goes, it's a brood of vipers. But Jesus' harshest words in Scripture were for the religious elite, right? He was always coming down on them because they're the ones. It's like, you're supposed to lessen people's burdens. You're supposed to be the light, right? You're supposed to be what people need. You're supposed to help. And you're just crushing people's spirits. And you're telling them they could never know God, right? And it's like, man, we do that. The church does that. So let's get back to the passage. So John chapter 8, we'll pick up at verse 31. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? And Jesus replied, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you are looking for a way to kill me because you have no room for my word. If you hold to my teaching, he says, you will be free. Well, what's the teaching? I'm glad you asked. I prepared for that question. John 15, right? So jump forward. John 15, we'll find out exactly. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, this is it again, right? If you keep my commands, you remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commands, remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Anybody want that? Come on, right? I want that. My command, in verse 12, here it is. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for a friend. And so the command is love. And it's like, Yeah, you talk a lot about that. It's like, 'cause Jesus talks a lot about it, right? Jesus talks a lot about love, but it's the question, I think a question that we can ask ourselves is, what does love require of me? In any situation, right? We can ask that question in any situation. It may be nothing, like cereal choice. Like, what does love require? It doesn't, right? It's just tricks, right? But there are things in our lives where we go, I don't know what to do, and we stress. That's what I was talking about earlier. Like, we stress about where to go, how to go. Answer the question first. What does love require? If I have a problem with my boss, what does love require? If I have a problem with my spouse, what does love require? If I'm trying to raise teenagers, what does love require? You know? Like, it's a simple question. What does love require? And the reality is, it requires you, all right? And there's a passage in Mark, and it says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. And that's what Jesus is doing throughout the entire series here, right? As we walk through John, what we're going to see over and over, every day, Jesus is picking up his cross, knowing where he's going, right? Knowing where this ends. And it's every day he gets up and he picks it up and he takes it. And so what is the cross? Like, what is our cross? What does it mean to pick up your cross? And it's something like bitterness or pain or whatever it is that's pulling you down. Like anything that's hard for you. It's like you just got to kind of pick it up and you got to keep moving, right? You can't just let it break you down. So you pick up your cross, whatever that is, whatever. I can't put my words on this. Life is pain, and you have a lot on your plate, and you have every right to be bitter and angry at times. But we have to pick that up, and we have to move forward. The world is only changed if we as a collective group take up our cross, take up the burden of life. There it is, the burden of life. That's the word I was looking for. Whatever's burdening you, you pick it up and you move. And it says, follow Jesus. Well, follow him where? Where is Jesus going? Jesus is going to the cross. Place of suffering, right? It's the peak of suffering. It's the most suffering, like, because it's the most tragic story, right? It's the most innocent person getting the most incredible death, painful death. So it's a place of suffering. So it's like, so are we supposed to pick up our burdens and then move towards suffering? It's like, yes. Yeah. It is our job to move towards other people's suffering. Find someone that's suffering. Find someone who's burdened. And you take your burden and you move towards them, not so that you can just say, I'm carrying my burden. It's like, no, so you can make other people's burdens lighter, right? That's why we move towards others. That's our role. That's why Jesus, knowing where he's going, he knows exactly where he's going, not because he wants to go to the cross, but because he knows it lifts the burden off of us, right? So let's go to the end of this chapter. We'll just kind of get to the end anyway. John chapter 8, verse 48. The Jews answered him, aren't we right in saying that you're a Samaritan and demon-possessed? When you ask that question, do you think Jesus would have been like, you got me. Demon-possessed. You nailed that. No. He says, I am not possessed by a demon, but I honor my Father and you dishonor me. I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly, I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death. Verse 52 says, at that they exclaimed, now we know you're demon-possessed. Abraham died, so did the prophets. Yet you say that whoever obeys your word will never taste death? Are you greater than our father Abraham? Father Abraham. You can't say those words without singing that song, right? I'm sorry, you don't have that in your head all day. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who? It's the same question. Who do you think you are? And Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. Listen, they do not like this, right? This is not nice of him to say to them. They are not fond of this. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I'd be a liar like you. But I do know him and obey his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. They said, you're not 50 years old. How have you seen Abraham? Very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. And at this they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. So why try to stone him at that moment? What is it that caused them to pick up stones? Well, he equated himself with God, right? That he makes the claim, and listen, I've had this argument with plenty of people. It's like people say he didn't make a claim. I don't think he made a claim of being God. In chapter 8 alone, he makes two claims of being God. He says, "I'm the pillar of fire" from Exodus, and he says this, which is actually kind of a reference back to Exodus, when Abraham, if you go back to the I am statement of Moses, he says before Moses saved the people from Egypt. All right, he was hanging out with his bride and his father-in-law Jethro. Right, they were living out beyond Egypt, and he's out dealing with sheep maybe, and a bush catches on fire. Right, you know this story. A bush catches on fire. Well, he sees it burning anyway, and it says it's not consumed. Right, it doesn't burn up, just keeps burning. And so Moses goes to it. And God speaks to him, and he says, this is what it says in Exodus 3. Catch this. It says, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Right? So Jesus, he leaves us, that is a claim, right? He's saying, I am. I'm the pillar of fire in Exodus, and I am the bush. I am the one that sent you. I'm the one that brought them out. I am God. And so that leaves us with four options. Jesus is either a lunatic, a liar, a legend, or he's Lord. Right? It's kind of a twist on the C.S. Lewis. Let's start with liar. There's no good reason to lie, right, about this, because it puts him on the cross, right? I mean, at any time, you don't die, right? You would never die for something you know to be a lie, right? You would never do that. If you knew something was false, you would just say that and like, please don't kill me. Lunatic. Lunatics cannot gather large groups of people the way that Jesus did and influence them the way he did. Because you think about, like, it's not lunatic like Hitler, okay? Because that's evil. All right, that's what I'm saying, a little different. So it's not the same type of lunatic as a Hitler, but it's like crazy, like one of the Kims in North Korea. I don't know which one it is, but it said that the first time he went golfing, he had a hole-in-one on every single hole. That's a lunatic, right? And he's only holding by power, right? So lunatic, Jesus is not a lunatic. They still follow him afterwards. Lunatic, Lord, legend. What if I told you the Browns won the Super Bowl in '97? What? They did. I believe it. You were there, right? Like if I wrote that down somewhere, if I wrote down the Browns won the Super Bowl in '97, I started passing that information around, you would all start talking to each other. There's the lunatic. You know, we found him. But the people, listen, the documents in the New Testament are consistently proven to be written within the lifetime of those who were with Jesus, right? So that means when it was written, If someone said Jesus came back from the dead, and they go, listen, there was 500 people. They start naming people. If you get into Acts, they start naming all kinds of people that saw him after he had been crucified and buried in a tomb, right? So you can't make that up when everyone around you was there. Because they know you were a liar or a lunatic. So it's not legend. It's not something that's made up. I mean, even the most ardent atheists believe that Jesus walked the earth. They don't believe he was God. They don't believe he came back from the dead, but they believe he existed. So that leaves Lord. John 8:28 says this. So Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. And lifted up here is a double entendre, right? So because they nail him to the cross, and then they lift him up. And that cross falls into the hole. But lifted up also means exalted. And so at the same moment that the death of Jesus is lifted up, it is also the same moment in which he is exalted. And the Bible says that when he was on the cross, that darkness came over all the land. How fitting for darkness to ensue when you begin to snuff out the light of the world. God bless.
Stand and sing with me.